The restaurant gleamed like a jewel under soft chandeliers, every table draped in white linen and adorned with fresh roses. Ethan Cole, the CEO of a multi-million-dollar firm, sat alone at the corner table, his sharp eyes scanning the entryway. His posture was impeccable, his expression unreadable. He wasn't a man used to waiting, yet tonight, he was, because his friend had insisted he go on a blind date. The clock ticked past 7, then 10 minutes more. The seat across from him remained empty. Ethan sighed, adjusting his cufflinks, already regretting this. The people around him laughed softly, couples leaning close in candlelight. For him, the evening was another reminder of how detached his world had become, polished, cold, and painfully empty. The glass door opened again, and in stumbled a girl, her hair slightly damp from the drizzle outside, her plain dress clinging to her knees. She looked around uncertainly, clutching a worn-out purse. The hostess was busy, so she made her way through the tables, muttering to herself about a table by the window. Before she realized it, she was standing in front of Ethan's table. "Excuse me," she whispered, "are you Daniel?" He raised an eyebrow but didn't speak. Her nervous smile trembled. "Oh, never mind, I think I," but before she could retreat, the waiter appeared, asking if she'd like to order. Ethan's lips curved slightly. "Sit," he said quietly. "Let's see how this goes." Her name was Lily, an elementary school teacher who'd been stood up by her own blind date at the restaurant next door. At first, she didn't understand why the man before her listened so intently, his piercing eyes softening with every word she spoke. She talked about her students, her struggle to make rent, and how she dreamed of opening a small library for kids who couldn't afford books. Ethan, who spent his life dealing in numbers and mergers, found himself strangely quiet, listening, really listening, for the first time in years. Her laughter, unrefined and warm, stirred something inside him he thought he'd lost. When the evening ended, she thanked him for the meal, still unaware of who he was. She left with an apologetic smile, saying, "I hope your real date shows up." Ethan watched her go, his reflection shimmering in the wine glass. For the first time, the restaurant didn't feel cold. For the first time, he wanted someone to come back, not because of who he was, but because of how she'd made him feel. That night, the powerful CEO realized something life-altering. The girl who sat by mistake might have been exactly what his heart had been waiting for. The restaurant was a masterpiece of quiet luxury. Soft jazz hummed beneath the low murmur of laughter, glasses chimed delicately, and the golden chandeliers reflected 1,000 tiny lights on marble floors. Every detail was designed for romance, yet the man sitting alone at the corner table looked as if he belonged to a different world entirely. Ethan Cole adjusted the cuffs of his charcoal suit with mechanical precision. He didn't fidget. He never fidgeted, but there was a restless edge in the way his gaze flicked to the entrance every few seconds. He had arrived on time, of course. Punctuality was a principle he lived by, one that built his empire brick by brick. But the woman he was supposed to meet, his blind date, arranged by his well-meaning but meddling assistant, was now 30 minutes late. He took a slow sip of his whiskey, the amber liquid catching the light like fire. He didn't believe in things like blind dates, chance meetings, or destiny. Relationships, to him, were contracts of convenience, mutual benefit disguised as affection. The truth was, Ethan Cole didn't have time for warmth. His life was spreadsheets, negotiations, and boardrooms filled with yes men who feared his silence more than his anger. Still, something inside him, perhaps boredom, perhaps loneliness, had made him say yes tonight. He looked at the empty chair across from him. The waiter had come by twice, asking if he'd like to order. He'd declined, each time more curtly than before. Around him, couples leaned close, whispering secrets and laughing softly. Their happiness grated against the quiet emptiness of his own table. He checked his watch. 7:45. Enough. Ethan stood, his chair scraping lightly against the polished floor. He reached for his coat, until a sudden voice caught the air. "Excuse me. Sorry. I think I'm late." He turned. A young woman stood at the entrance, breathless, clutching a small purse to her chest. Her hair was damp from the rain outside, her dress simple and wrinkled at the edges. For a moment, she looked utterly lost, then her eyes found his table. Ethan frowned slightly, ready to correct her mistake. But before he could speak, she began to walk toward him with hesitant hope in her eyes. And for reasons he couldn't explain, Ethan didn't stop her. The soft click of her heels echoed faintly against the marble as she approached, each hesitant step carrying a blend of nervousness and misplaced confidence. Ethan remained seated, watching her closely. She was nothing like the women he usually met. No designer heels, no polished hair, no calculated charm. Instead, her presence was disarmingly real. "Are you, Daniel?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan blinked. For a man who was rarely caught off guard, he found himself momentarily speechless. "No," he said finally, his tone smooth but cool. "You must be mistaken." Her face fell instantly, a rush of embarrassment coloring her cheeks. Oh no, I must have." She clutched her bag tighter, fumbling for composure. "I'm so sorry. I thought. Well, never mind. I think my friend said the table by the window," and, before she could finish, the waiter appeared beside them, all smiles and timing. "Good evening. Shall I bring the menu, sir, madam?" Ethan glanced at the empty chair across from him, the one he'd almost abandoned minutes ago. For a reason he couldn't quite name, he gestured slightly toward it. "Sit," he said quietly. Her eyes widened. "Oh, no, that's not. Really, I shouldn't, please." His tone was firm, but not unkind. "You're already here." After a heartbeat of hesitation, she sank into the seat, still looking like she might bolt any second. The waiter set down the menus, and Ethan caught the faint tremor in her fingers as she tried to hide her nerves. She gave a nervous laugh. "I promise I'm not usually this awkward. Tonight's just a bit of a disaster." Ethan leaned back in his chair, curiosity flickering across his usually impassive face. "How so?" "Well," she said, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, "I was supposed to meet someone. Blind date. Except it looks like he's decided not to show." She forced a small smile. "So, I guess it's just me and my bad luck tonight." For the first time in years, Ethan didn't know what to say. He only studied her, this drenched, apologetic girl who had wandered into his evening by mistake, and felt something unfamiliar stir in his chest. Maybe, he thought, fate had a strange sense of humor after all. For a moment, silence hovered between them, awkward but not entirely uncomfortable. The waiter returned with water and 2 menus, his professional smile unaware that this was a dinner born entirely out of coincidence. Ethan glanced at the girl again as she tucked her wet hair behind her ear and scanned the menu with furrowed brows. She clearly wasn't used to restaurants like this. Her eyes lingered too long on the prices, her lips pressing into a small, worried line. "Order whatever you like," Ethan said, his tone clipped but even. She looked up, startled. "Oh, no, I couldn't. This place is way too expensive. I'll just have, maybe a soup." A corner of his mouth lifted. "You'll starve." That earned him a soft laugh, one that caught him off guard. It was unpolished, real, and strangely infectious. "You don't strike me as someone who worries about starving," she teased gently. He arched a brow. "And what do I strike you as?" She tilted her head, pretending to study him. "Honestly, the kind of man who owns the building rather than eats in it." Ethan's chest shook with a quiet chuckle before he could stop himself. He hadn't laughed like that he couldn't even remember when. "Not far off," he murmured. They ended up ordering her a modest plate of pasta, him the chef's recommendation. As the evening went on, conversation began to flow like slow, steady rain. She introduced herself as Lily Evans, an elementary school teacher who spent her days wrangling 7-year-olds and her nights grading papers. Her life was small, ordinary, yet the way she spoke about it, animated, hopeful, passionate, made it feel extraordinary. Ethan found himself asking questions he never asked anyone. "Why teaching? You don't get tired. What keeps you going?" She smiled at that last one, tracing the rim of her glass. "Because someone has to remind kids that they matter. Not everyone hears that at home." Her words hit something deep within him, a part he'd buried under years of ambition and solitude. For once, he didn't think about his phone, his schedule, or the deal waiting in his inbox. When the plates were cleared, Lily leaned back, sighing contentedly. "You know," she said softly, "for a dinner that started with a mistake, this turned out surprisingly nice." Ethan met her gaze, his usual coolness gone. Yes, he said, his voice lower now. It did. And for the first time in a long, long while, he didn't feel like the loneliest man in the room. The restaurant had begun to quiet down. The soft hum of conversation faded as couples drifted out into the cool night, leaving only the faint echo of clinking glasses and the distant melody of the piano. Candles burned lower, their golden light softening the edges of everything, including Ethan Cole's expression. Lily dabbed her lips with the napkin and smiled, a little shy, a little surprised at how comfortable she'd become. "Thank you for letting me sit here," she said. "I really didn't mean to crash your dinner." Ethan's gaze held hers for a long moment before he spoke. "You didn't crash it," he said quietly. "You improved it." Her laughter came again. Gentle, genuine. "That's probably the nicest thing anyone said to me this week." She reached for her bag, still unaware of who he truly was, still talking to him like an ordinary man. And somehow, he liked that. When the waiter brought the bill, Ethan handed over his card without looking. She immediately protested. "Wait. No, you don't have to do that. I can pay for my half." He shook his head. "Consider it an apology." "For what?" she asked, frowning. "For nearly leaving before you walked in." That made her smile again. Soft, with a trace of something wistful. "Then I'm glad you didn't." They stood outside together beneath the awning, the rain having slowed to a delicate drizzle. The city lights blurred against the wet pavement, cars hissing past like whispers. Lily pulled her thin cardigan tighter around herself, her breath forming small clouds in the air. "So," she said, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear, "I guess this is where I say goodnight." Ethan wanted to say something. Anything, to keep her there. He wasn't used to wanting. He wasn't used to missing something that hadn't even left yet. But the words tangled somewhere in his chest. "Good night, Lily," he said instead, his voice softer than he intended. She smiled one last time, lifting a hand in farewell before stepping out into the drizzle. He watched her go until her small figure disappeared around the corner, her reflection rippling across the wet streetlights. Inside the quiet of his black car, Ethan sat for a long while before starting the engine. For years, his life had been a carefully controlled empire of order and logic. But tonight, a girl with rain in her hair and kindness in her voice had walked in by mistake, and somehow, she'd left the door open in his heart.